Started. So good afternoon, everybody. My name is Lisa Foreman. I'm an associate professor here at the Dalla School of Public Health, and it's an absolute pleasure to welcome you to this exciting panel on the future of global health law, to engage this really wonderful lineup of scholars to think about the state and future of this body of international law, and to launch Professor Meier's foundational new textbook on this topic. It's a really critical time in global health law, with major law reforms on the way in the wake of COVID. And potentially in the work. So Ben's book comes at an absolutely critical time for this area of law. Before I hand over to Professor Hoffman, who will formally moderate, I just want to say what a pleasure it has been to partner with Stephen and with Ben with the Global Health Law Consortium and the Global Strategy Lab over at York University, and also to have Professor Ngwaba here and have representatives of all three Toronto universities around the table. And before I hand over to Stephen, I also want to thank Sofia Gutierrez, Demetria Tsouris, Nur Hassan, and Adrian Gomez for their incredible logistical help in organizing this panel. And with that, I'll hand over to you, Stephen.
Thanks so much, Lisa. So I'm Stephen Hoffman. I'm a professor at York University, where I direct the Global Strategy Lab. Lisa, as you said, is delighted to work with you to bring this event together. These are interesting times for global health law, in the sense that it was maybe only a few years ago, there would have been debates. Is global health law a field, a practice? Is it a field of scholarship? I guess all of us were sort of working in it, but we were often getting questions of, like, what is global health law? And I guess we still get those questions, but of course, today, and maybe especially in light of the COVID-19 pandemic, I think there's no debate as to whether this is a field. But I think it's also, thinking about it, there's an important moment that if it is a field, and I think we all, of course it is a field, and hopefully everyone listening to this agrees, but fields need things. They need foundational courses, they need graduate programs, they need a textbook. And so we haven't had this until now. And so in some respects, today's event is a discussion about the future of global health law, but it's also a really important moment, because in launching, doing a Canadian launch for this text, it's really sort of a moment that the field is growing up. I mean, we're not fully grown up. There's still lots more to be done. We need a journal, we need other things, maybe, so that the usual trappings of a field. But this is certainly an important milestone. And so Ben, a big congratulations to you and Larry Gostin, with whom you co-edited this text. So looking forward to discussing it today. So the way that today was going to work, I'll be your moderator. Looking forward to sort of catalyzing some good conversation here. What we'll do is, after I introduce the panel, I will be turning it over to Ben, Professor Ben Meier, who is a professor at UNC Chapel Hill and the co-editor of this new text. He'll be providing a bit of an introduction about the book, the reason behind it, kind of what its intended was, and a bit of an overview. From there, we'll be turning it to Lisa, as no introduction needed, professor here at the University of Toronto and Canada Research Chair, to provide a bit of an overview of the chapter, one or two chapters, because Lisa has the opportunity to contribute to this book, so that's amazing, Lisa. And then following that, Professor Uchechuwku Ngwaba from Toronto Metropolitan University will be contributing as well. And so Uche is the member of the panel that did not directly contribute to the book, which means he's the one you want to trust the most about what he says about it. So that we have a critical, independent colleague, and it's great, as Lisa, as you said, having the three Toronto-based universities all working together. We should do more of this. Looking forward to that. With that, there will be time for questions for those in the room. For those joining online, there is a Q&A button. Please do ask your questions. They will be moderated, and we have a way that some of the questions are going to be transmitted through a text message to my phone, and so that will be a way that we will make sure that those online have the ability to ask questions as well. And we will be ending promptly after an hour, given we want to respect people's time. So with that, let me turn it over to Professor Benjamin Mason-Meier for the introduction.
Okay. Thank you so much, Professor Hoffman, and thank you all joining us here in Canada and throughout the world for this launch of Global Health Law and Policy. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, depending on where you are in the world. My name is Benjamin Meier. I'm a professor of global health policy at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. I'm a senior scholar at the O'Neill Institute for National and Global Health Law, and I'm the chair of the Global Health Law Consortium, which brings together faculty throughout the world who really think about how law can influence global health. And I'm delighted to support this textbook so that we can think about how law can support the next generation of global health. Really grateful for this unique opportunity to think about how we developed this book and to think about what it will mean for the consortium members who developed it, for the field itself, and for the students who we look to in drawing this field forward. Opening our discussion today, I really hope to think about what this foundational text means, to really examine how we apply law and policy today to a new set of public health threats, to a new set of non-state actors, and to a new set of regulatory norms that structure global health. As our two opening speakers mentioned, this book arrives at a challenging time, and we'll discuss some of these unprecedented threats that we're facing today, from COVID-19 to rising violence to climate change. And yet amidst these challenges to health in a globalizing world, we look to this book in charting a way forward for global governance. And through this book, we seek to do four things. Really to introduce the frameworks and institutions that define global health, to think about how global governance has responded to both communicable and non-communicable disease threats, to examine the economic institutions that are increasingly influencing global health governance, and to analyze rising legal efforts to influence the increasing challenges of our rapidly globalizing world. And where the world faces these continuing challenges, challenging our institutions of global health governance, this book really examines how global health law can strengthen our global governance systems for health, and to provide a foundation for the next generation and ensure justice for a healthier world. And so in opening our discussion today, I hope that I can begin by helping us think about the importance of global health law and policy to advancing global health with justice, and to provide a foundation for our discussion by laying out the role of law and policy in structuring global health governance. These law and policy efforts have evolved rapidly in the 21st century, giving rise to the academic field that Professor Hoffman mentioned. And this field now develops through journals, through textbooks, through instruments. And so I'll end by examining the wide range of issues that are addressed by this field, and to examine how this book came together through our Global Health Law Consortium, and how it provides a template for teaching global health law and policy across graduate institutions. In many ways, we open the book by recognizing the global health challenges we face today are different than we have ever faced before, examining how globalization has unleashed the spread of both communicable and non-communicable diseases, and connected societies in shared vulnerability to common health threats. To address these determinants of health, it means to talk about global health governance today. Dr. Tedros, the Director General of the World Health Organization, in his foreword to the book, recognizes that, quote, the promotion of global health necessitates global governance beyond the reach of national governments, requiring international organizations, national governments, and non-governmental actors to come together under law to respond to globalized health threats. In this context, we see that law has really become crucial to addressing global health, challenging our world and facing the challenges that we face today, with global governance serving as a foundation for both developing and implementing global health law. And this focus on global health law really complements law and policy frameworks, both binding and non-binding frameworks that structure public health in the world today. Under both hard and soft law frameworks, and across an extensive body of global governance institutions, actors are coming together now to respond to our global health challenges, working to create coordinated responses through global governance. As the importance of law and policy have become apparent, it is this rise of a new field that has helped us to conceptualize the rising global health threats, the common global health norms, and the new global health institutions that have given rise to the new field that we are celebrating today. And so this field of global health law has expanded rapidly over the course of the 21st century, arising out of international law, which has established international agreements for infectious disease control since the 19th century. This new field of global health law has a far larger scope, binding together state and non-state actors, addressing law through both hard law and soft law, allowing us to bring together global health law and policy. As an academic discipline, global health law really describes these law and policy frameworks, helping us to think about the rising new threats we face today, including communicable and non-communicable diseases, structuring mental health policy, focusing us on environmental health harms, helping us to recognize the impact of global economic governance on global health, and helping us to recognize the rising threats from antimicrobial resistance to climate change. It's helped us to conceptualize the proliferating health actors who are now part of this world, from non-governmental organizations and transnational corporations, to private philanthropists, civil society, and other non-state actors. And it's helped us to think about expanding policy instruments, especially including these so-called soft law instruments, strategy documents, action plans, and other norms of global health policy. Given this growing importance of law and policy to global health, Professor Hoffman organized in 2019 a conference to bring together the legal faculty who work at the intersection of international law and global health. And these early efforts gave rise to our Global Health Law Consortium. Recognizing the limitations of legal authorities for global health, with the COVID-19 pandemic exposing our legal limitations and addressing the health harms of a globalizing world, our Global Health Law Consortium has worked over the past 4 years to develop interpretations of international legal instruments, to facilitate collaborative legal research, and to advance the field of global health law itself. And in advancing this field for the next generation, our consortium members, alongside leading scholars at the intersection of law and global health, saw the need to develop a foundational text to support students in facing the challenges that we could not face ourselves, to think about the challenges coming in the years ahead, responding to these existential threats and building a better world. I really hope that as we examine this textbook, that we're building something to prepare the next generation to engage with global health lawmaking, to ensure justice for a healthier world. This is the fight for the future, and I'm inspired to have so many Canadian colleagues with me here today to think about how this field can give you the tools for the fights to come. Thank you so much for inviting me here. I'm excited for the conversation in the next hour, and I hope that this textbook can provide a foundation as the next generation approaches the challenges ahead. Thank you.
Thanks so much for opening us up today. I love these kind of events because it really reminds us what we do every day, why it's actually so important. And I think, Ben, you beautifully sort of contextualized sort of the range of things that we're trying to tackle, the depth of the problems. And there's a lot, and global health law intersects with so many areas. We do now have Professor Lisa Foreman, to help actually dive into a couple of them, given your leadership of 2 of the chapters in this book. And so, Lisa, maybe I'll pass it right over to you. Thanks.
So it sounds like we're doing a big pitch for the book. I guess we are. This is a launch, but I just want to point out one thing. It's really testament to Ben's persuasive powers that he managed to coordinate 40 independent scholars to produce 20 chapters over, it was under 2 years then? A year and a half. I mean, if you've ever been involved with an edited volume, you have to know what an unbelievable achievement it is and what a testament it is to Ben's persuasive powers. And somehow he managed to convince me to contribute 2 chapters to this volume, at least in part because it was an opportunity to work with incredible scholars like Professor Katrina Perahudov at the University of Amsterdam and Professor Chuanfeng Wu at Academia Sinica, who I co-authored the chapter on international trade governance with, and also to work with Professor Judith Buena de Mesquita at Essex University, and we wrote the chapter on global health norms, which looks into human rights, social justice, and equity. We're talking a lot about how new the field of global health law is. So this is going to be an incredibly important text for scholars, for learners, for educators. Certainly as we introduce coursework on global health law here at the Dalla Lana, it's going to be a foundational text. But one of the reasons why I think the field of global health law emerged as it has is that there is this bigger problem in international law of fragmentation, of a lot of new areas of international law that have their own specialized regimes and institutions and norms, and they deal with their own issue areas of international law with no connection between the regimes, even when they impact on each other. And so in international law, we've been grappling for a while with the problem of fragmentation and how to achieve some level of coherence between the fields. And I think that's one way to understand why it is that the area of global health law has emerged in the way that it has, because it is, on the one hand, a disciplinary effort to bring connections and rigor between the two areas of international law that impact on health, but it's also its own method of achieving a form of linkage and coherence in some ways. And I don't think it's really a coincidence that the two chapters that I have contributed are on trade and human rights. I mean, I'm a human rights law scholar, but the impact of international trade law on health and on human rights has been so significant that the interconnections between those two areas are just embedded into the study of trade and into the study of international human rights law. So I think, you'll see in the chapters in the book that extent of overlap, that in the chapter on trade, there's a discussion of the extent to which human rights have been really critical legal and political strategies to advance access to medicines and to limit the impact of trade, investment, and intellectual property rights laws on people's access to essential health goods. On the other hand, some of the campaigns to advance access to affordable medicines and vaccines have been some of the most foundational, successful human rights campaigns of our modern era. So as a human rights scholar, a lot of my work has been bringing those areas into connection. And so for people who want to learn about those areas, you'll really get a deep dive in both the chapters in different ways into the areas of international trade governance, much more broadly, and into the much broader realm of norms that are active and operational in global health, from social justice to equity to human rights. And I'll maybe stop there before going into, I'm happy to talk about the contents a little further on.
Thanks so much, Lisa. Our last sort of speaker before we dive into sort of questions and answers, both from me as well as the audience. We have Professor Uchechuwku Ngwaba, who has been teaching, global health law at Toronto Metropolitan University, and has, I guess, a unique take about how this kind of a resource can be helpful and where it fits in the broader field of efforts. Uche, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, I think as someone who is a stakeholder in global health law as a faculty teaching the subject, I think this book is an important resource in many ways, but I'd like to speak to the way it contributes to the work we do in three specific areas. The first is a book like this maps the field, allows us to build consensus around issues of common concern in global health law. And it also allows us to identify areas of disagreements, because this is really key, in a new field such as this. It is not always the case that we necessarily agree on direction or on some of the norms that are embraced. And so with a text like this, we're able to see some of the areas where we can agree and areas where we have disagreements, and that is really critical. Secondly, it sets the stage for critical discourses at various intersections of global health. I'm a critical scholar, and when I do global health, I use a very critical lens to engage with global health. And so this could be a starting point for me to bring in my critical interventions to the discourse. And in that way, we are able to sort of bring together mirror perspectives, which is really very important. And then finally, I see this as a very important tool in the search for answers to the enduring global health challenges that we face, and also in advancing global health justice. When we talk about some of the challenges that we face in global health, sometimes it is very hard to identify the specific ways that various aspects of international law, global health governance, and global health normativity can contribute or hinder the attainment of global health justice. So I think that a text like this allows us to really see this in clear sight and to be able to take positions in that. So I'll stop here.
I think one of the questions I definitely want to make sure we talk about is how has the COVID-19 pandemic made us rethink global health law and its opportunity, its challenges, where it's going to be going in the future. I'm supposed to be a chatty chair in this discussion, so I will sort of put forward at least some initial ideas, just drawing on the chapter that I contributed along with Dr. Isaac Weldon, who's in the room contributing. We wrote the chapter on antimicrobial resistance. And one of the things that's clear from the pandemic context is how much we're all in it together. These are risks that transcend national borders. Viruses don't carry passports, nor do bacteria. And as a result, we can't build walls big enough or high enough, no matter what president might be in power in the United States. There's no walls that can protect us. The best way of protecting is, of course, working together, figuring out how to do it. And so in the context, it's very clear in the context of very loud pandemic, like we saw with COVID-19, also clear with a more quieter pandemic, like we're seeing every day with antimicrobial resistance. And so when thinking about the pandemic, and as it sort of in some respects sort of just only deepens and energizes that need for thinking of what role can global health law achieve, but it also really highlights some really big challenges in the sense that pandemics is actually an area where there are existing international laws, clear, hard law mechanisms, specifically the international health regulations, which I guess needs to, of course, be interpreted in light of unique circumstances and evolving science. But it's clearly COVID-19 was a bit of a magnifying glass on both why global health law is so important when you think of things like infectious disease or like antimicrobial resistance, the focus of my chapter with Dr. Weldon, but also thinking of the challenges to it actually having the kind of effects, equitable effects that we all want to see in the world. Any thoughts from any of your perspectives about how COVID-19 has caused us to rethink global health law? Who wants to go first?
Let me jump on this. I think that one of the very important insights that we get out of the COVID pandemic is that we need to rethink global health governance. There was clearly a failure of governance at various levels, the national level, the global level. And I think that the pandemic offers us an opportunity to unpack these existing structures and see whether or not there is a case to be made for a renewal either of the structures or coming up with new ideas around how we should govern global health. So I think that is one important insight to get from them.
I must say, I'm very struck, Stephen, by your framing COVID as a loud pandemic and the idea of there being quieter crises. And I think it's a really powerful point. I mean, international law is really framed as a body of law that is attentive to loud crises, I think, and less effective at dealing with the more silent crises. And I think in some sense, we're less well equipped to frame other things, more daily injustices, more quotidian type things as crises. But to get back to your question, how does COVID make us rethink global health law? I mean, I think we are nowhere near understanding the way that it's going to impact the development of this body of law. For me personally, as a longstanding international law scholar, it was truly devastating to see that the laws, the norms, the institutions, the actors, it stood for nothing in the face of this crisis almost immediately. no matter what the rhetoric of solidarity, of equity, of human rights was, no matter the attempt to create institutions precisely to assure equity like COVAX, but within a very, very short period of time, inequity reproduced in the most awful ways. And it wasn't even that it was new forms of equity, it was exactly the same types of inequities that we've seen in previous crises like AIDS, like H1N1. So that for me was a really, I think for a lot of people in this field, it was quite a, if any sort of naivety remained about the extent to which those ideals actually held real value in the world, it really took away that sense for me. And it's not that I'm left with a sense of hopelessness, but with I think more with a renewed sense that the institutions and the norms that we have and the laws that we have simply aren't well equipped to deal with a problem like COVID. And so I hope that the global health, the reforms that are on the table, there's a lot of, I know we'll speak about that. I hope that they'll do something to improve the nature of the system. But I think that the challenge is a bigger, longer question for all of us in the field and for all of you who are practitioners in one way or another connected to this. It's how, I think it's the central question. How do we make the system fit for purpose?
And in thinking about how we make the system fit for purpose, I appreciate that you begin with the wall, as an American, because in so many ways, and coming to Lisa's point, the response to the pandemic was to divide the world when we needed to come together. The wall that was built shut us off from international commerce, set us off from international trade, set people apart from each other, and threatened to withdraw the United States from the World Health Organization. And what this pandemic has made clear is in facing global threats, no amount of domestic law is fit for purpose. That we really need to respond to globalized threats of infectious disease alongside a wide range of the quieter pandemics that we face every day. We need to respond at the global level through global health laws. And one of the reasons why we developed this book was in many ways because our consortium was actively working to support national governments, to support the World Health Organization in confronting this global response. But it became clear that even within the highest levels of global health governance, there wasn't a true understanding of the ways in which global health law and policy could be applied. In fact, our consortium came together because the international health regulations lacked clarity that states needed in order to adhere to international health laws. And so it's been inspiring to work in the pandemic response to recognize that our scholarship can help to shed light for policymakers on the importance of global health law and policy. It's equally inspiring now as we begin to think about future pandemics as our consortium works to support actors in revising the international health regulations for future public health emergencies, works with nations in the development of a pandemic accord separate from the international health regulations, and helps to make it clear for policymakers and now for students that in order to bring nations together in solidarity, legal and policy agreements can play a crucial role in both setting up the norms that bring us together and facilitating accountability for those norms.
I think you're making all great points about how if global health law was robust and adaptive, if it was of a strength to counter and address the challenges that it's trying to encounter, it should have allowed us during the COVID-19 pandemic to actually be united instead of divided. In some respects, I mean, a virus like SARS-CoV-2 that causes COVID-19, that could be something that unites the world. We all face it together, right? We're all susceptible, and before vaccines were developed, so we were all. This was something we faced no matter our income and race and gender and sex, and that was something that could have been a unifying factor, but of course it wasn't. And there's many reasons beyond global health law, but when you think, and Lisa, you said it so well, and Ben, ending with that notion that global health law wasn't up to the task. And it's not because of, well, hopefully it's not because of scholars of global health law and such, but there isn't the same, often the same kind of energy or attention put into Like, how do you design global health law so it actually has effects? How do we design institutions, whether it's the World Health Organization or others, that can kind of quickly pivot? I think, Lisa, you mentioned a point about how international law is better at addressing sort of these bigger, louder problems. But of course, international law and international institutions are very bad at addressing fast-moving challenges. So the loud and fast-moving challenges, like a pandemic, like other things like global health law is trying to address, quite a challenge. So my next question before I go to the audience, so the next one is on in the audience, as well as for those joining online, use the Q&A button to ask your questions. We'll get to them as well. But my last question then is, what are the prospects for global health law in the future? We know, for example, that already there's efforts happening right now to be reforming the international health regulations, which is that those rules that I previously mentioned that govern the spread of infectious diseases and other hazards across countries. There's negotiation of a new pandemic treaty. Maybe there's opportunity there. We'd love a sense from the panel. What are the prospects for global health law? Where should the field go in light of both the past and the future opportunities and challenges? Who wants to go first? Uche, over to you.
Okay. I think that the pandemic invites us to begin to think about alternative structures. And in that regard, I'm beginning to think about regional structures. There is a very strong argument that can be made about regionalizing global health governance. Three key things come to mind as really supporting this idea. The first being the fact that global health governance is, at least from the global south, there is a sense in which there is suspicion about really the agenda of global health and whether or not it is not sort of steeped in coloniality and advancing this sort of its colonial origins. And so there is a case to be made for decentralizing health governance. The second point really is the fact that the global health governance under the WHO architecture is underfunded. It's highly burdened by the politics of power. We saw that during the pandemic. WHO Director General was felt to be too much in close proximity with China, and that did not sit well with some states. And then a final point is really just a very practical one, which is that it is easier to do solidarity with your neighbors. We'll talk about global health solidarity. I think that Canada will find it easier to do solidarity with Caribbean states than, say, West African states, for example. So if solidarity is the objective of any strategy to deal with the transnational health threat, then I think that it is easier to promote this idea of solidarity at a regional level when you have regional structures. And so a regional health governance framework will serve as an intermediate framework between the national framework and the global health framework under WHO, which will allow us to more easily mobilize to deal with regional health threats so that we do not have situations where you talk about forgotten tropical diseases. Diseases are not forgotten, they are just ignored. And so at the regional level, you can have countries that are dealing with regional type diseases operating within the context of their framing. And then where it is a threat that goes beyond a particular region, then we can now begin to mobilize the global architecture to deal with it. As someone, I think it was Ben that mentioned the point that national structures are no longer effective to deal with transnational health threats. And so this is a very strong argument that can be made in that regard.
I'm very struck, I think I said fit for purpose. I think all of us have, we use that phrase fit for purpose in this, particularly through COVID, particularly as we were assessing things like the international health regulations and all of these institutions that some of which were created specifically to address pandemics. But I think maybe the question that it sort of provokes is, well, what is the purpose of some of these institutions, and is that purpose actually to advance global health in an equitable way to assure effective pandemic response preparedness, etc.? Because I think maybe what the pandemic tells us is that that isn't the necessarily the purpose. And sometimes we see it fairly explicitly. You know, the international health regulations, which are the primary instrument that we have around pandemic, are very explicitly framed around sort of with pandemic response being balanced with the movement of trade of goods and people. And so and then with more implicitly with objectives of global health security. So, you know, sort of straightforwardly, public health response and global health response butts up against a range of other really powerful embedded interests around politics, around trade, around economics, around security. I mean, we saw it so very, very clearly when it came to access to COVID vaccines and the way in which access to vaccines very straightforwardly came down to the extent to which a country was winnowed in its objectives into what can I get for my own population, which is a very reasonable, I think, policy objective to have. But on the other hand, that crisis mentality also meant that there was absolutely no consideration. If Canada as a government buys all of these vaccines, what are the implications for other countries? What are the implications for our neighbors? What are the implications for countries around the world? There just wasn't that type of consideration. So I think that really is the biggest challenge as we get into reforms to the system, to the international health regulations, a potential pandemic treaty, other ways where we can strengthen and bolster and build and link the human rights system is how do we deal with the real politic of global health?
And so I want to pick up on this idea of entrenched interests and how they hobble our efforts to address global health law challenges, both the ones we face today and the ones we'll face tomorrow. Each of the chapters in the textbook really ends with a discussion of the forward-looking challenges and the ways in which these can be addressed. And of course, we address the continuing coloniality, the global health system that Uche raised, and the ways in which we can decolonize global health through reforms of global health law. We begin to recognize the challenges of divergent legal paradigms and the ways in which, as we develop global health law reforms, we can't neglect the influence of the World Trade Organization, the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, and the wide range of institutions that are also developing reforms right now. And we also need to frontally address and confront the challenge of rising populist forces. At a moment when global solidarity is crucially necessary, the rise of right-wing populism is seeking to divide the world in facing our common threats. And in the COVID-19 response, we saw these populist forces rejecting the science of public health as a way to minimize the problem in ways that threaten their own populations and allow the pandemic to spin out of control. We saw these governments violate the human rights that bind us all together, repressing minority populations and restricting civil society space. And we saw these forces also attacking global governance and the very idea of a common humanity that binds us all together. And as we think about these global health law reforms, both inside and outside of the World Health Organization, we need to recognize the failures of our policies to confront these populist forces and the ways in which our policies need to make sure that there is accountability to ensure that national governments, no matter how recalcitrant, remain part of the global system. Because when we don't work together in facing these common threats, we all fail. And so these challenges of nationalism, seeking to divide the world at a moment when we need to come together, need to be confronted in these global health law reforms to make sure that we have the tools in place to respond no matter which governments are in power in future pandemic threats and a wide range of other global health challenges.
I promised to go to the audience and online to ask questions, although I do feel compelled at least to return to the question about IHR reform and the pandemic treaty. Because we are in global health law, we are about to see potentially a revised global health law instruments and then potentially a new one that's could be coming online if member states of WHO agree to it. excited about it, not excited about it. I think a lot of our, it's funny, a lot of our conversation thus far about the future of global health is some pretty depressing themes emerging, and for good reason, there's also a little bit of optimism that we've highlighted about how global health law can help actually kind of punch through some of these depressing realities and legacies of colonialism and inequities and continuing realpolitik, Lisa, as you said. Any thoughts about the pandemic treaty and IHR reform specifically? More excited, less excited? Any thoughts about that? And then we'll go to the audience, so please do get your questions ready.
I think I'm slightly ambivalent
Okay.
about it. Any reform that would help address the future challenges we face has to address historical, structural, and institutional challenges. And I doubt if those revisions to the international health regulations and the negotiation of the pandemic treaty go far enough to do so. And so for that reason, I'm ambivalent, maybe somewhat cautiously optimistic, but I really won't hold my breath.
Yeah, cautiously optimistic would, I think, cover it as opposed to uncautiously pessimistic. I mean, it's hard to say at this point what we'll get. Some of the sort of the directions that we're seeing, we know anytime an instrument is negotiated, it's the lowest common denominator, and sort of a lot of the language around equity and rights and some of the substantive provisions, you land up with something a lot more constrained than what anyone would hope for. So my cautious optimism is that the language on equity, on rights, on benefit sharing, on waivers of IP, those types of provisions make their way through negotiations and are not hamstrung in the negotiation process to the point and diluted to the point of absolute inefficacy. The optimist in me likes to think that even if we get a very weak instrument, it might do better than what we have now. The pessimist in me, who was fed very well during COVID, worries about what a new instrument might do in terms of diluting the system and weakening the system. And so I don't know. I think we're all watching and waiting for that.
So I'll pick up on this idea of cautious optimism. All of our global health law reforms in the past have come in the aftermath of crisis. This is one of these moments. And so we begin the textbook really focusing on 3 different areas of policymaking, really who the actors are who are sitting at the table, who has the power to set the agenda, what are the norms that bring them all together, are they around equity and rights, or are they around economic advantage, and what is the diplomatic process like? What are the forums for negotiation, who's involved, who's not involved, what room is there for negotiating these different reforms that are absolutely necessary and will not be accomplished to the extent that any of us want them to be. One of the things that does give me a lot of hope is that a lot of the proposals that are put forward now create new institutions, new ways of bringing states together after the law reform is done. Whether it's about a pandemic treaty that would have its own monitoring body to work with states, or a conference of the parties that would bring member states together to negotiate new protocols, whether it's about the international health regulations and the opportunities that are presented by the Joint External Evaluation, the JEE, to monitor states in their development of core public health capacities to meet the IHR. We need to focus not just on the instruments themselves, but on the institutions that are created by the instruments. We had a conversation leading up to this about the ways in which ratification of a treaty is only the first step. It's about what comes next. And so we need to think about how we're developing institutions that allow for continuing engagement, because this won't happen overnight. These are generational problems that led us to this pandemic and the failures of our COVID-19 response, and it will take a new generation to build up new institutions, respond successfully to future threats.
I think, like the other panelists, I'm cautiously optimistic, but maybe the optimistic part is we're making a conscious choice because we want to be optimistic.
Yeah.
So it's not as much fun living life as a pessimist. But Uche, I thought you said it so well in the sense that we need transformation, and we're not going to get it from the pandemic instruments, and we're not going to get it from a reformed international health regulations. And so if COVID wasn't sort of a big enough jolt to get what's needed, that is depressing. That being said, I'm systematically always trying to find silver linings to things. So one thing that I am excited about, at least with the most recently leaked text of the pandemic treaty that was leaked about a month ago, there is the inclusion of antimicrobial resistance within the scope of the pandemic treaty. So that's something that myself and the Global Strategy Lab have been advocating for almost 10 years and worked with governments to promote this idea through the negotiating process. And indeed, in the book chapter, Ben, Dr. Weld and I actually call for the inclusion of antimicrobial resistance in the pandemic treaty. So if we do get a treaty by the negotiators stated intended deadline of May 2024, which is a question whether that deadline is going to be met, the book might be already outdated, Ben, and we might need edition number 2 faster than we might have thought. But that's okay, because we'll be able to have a book launch and have more conversations like this. Would love to go to the audience. Any questions, thoughts, ideas, challenges? My understanding is there's currently no questions yet from our online audience, but if there are, we will take a look at that as well. First, Jocelyn, and then Isaac.
I was curious about the opportunities of global health law to apply to what you call non-state actors. Could you talk a bit about that? I think I have an idea of how it works for states, but I don't really understand how you could apply the same type of law to multinational companies or non-state actors.
So I'll begin to answer this question because I think this is what takes us from international law and international legal norms that bind strictly to nation states that sign and ratify them, and shift us toward global health law that really focuses on both hard law norms that do focus really just on states, and then these soft law norms that really help to bind together state and non-state actors. And this includes everything from global action plans that often include non-state actors. It involves monitoring systems that focus on what non-state actors are doing. It involves global health partnerships, both partnerships across public actors, but also public-private partnerships, and the ways in which they are bound together. That is also a form of soft law. And so we recognize that these non-state actors have increasingly become a part of the global health system. When the World Health Organization was developed in 1948, it was assumed that the World Health Organization would be a leader of international health between its member states. But we now see that global health is influenced by far more than these nation states. And we really need to think about how these soft law instruments, in whatever form they operate, provide an opportunity to bring together state and non-state actors so that everyone is working with the same norms, around the same table, and influencing the same partnerships that are increasingly necessary to address many of our global health problems.
Since your book chapter was actually on exactly this area, Lisa, we should go to you, and then we can go to Isaac. Yeah.
But it really is a fundamental question. International law has been trying for a really long time to come up with, if not influential and binding, at least normative principles to address transnational corporation business entities, and repeatedly has failed because business and transnational corporations have no interest in being bound by international law. So there is a treaty that is currently in negotiation on business and human rights, which I've been very excited about. I was informed on Friday by somebody extremely knowledgeable that there is almost no way that that treaty will see the light of day. I mean, so that's the one piece is, here's where you really butt up against. The other piece is we always, when we speak of non-state actors, we think of transnational corporations and businesses. we don't think about the philanthropic organizations like the Gates Foundation that exert enormous amounts of influence and in this sphere. You know, I for a long time have not been concerned because I thought it was a very benign influence, but I came out of COVID seeing the Gates Foundation's influence on discussions like around things like the TRIPS waiver have it with a slightly different understanding. So the problem is bigger than business, and I don't know that we're anywhere near any resolution there. And not to, again, I don't want to end on that pessimistic note, but I don't know how else to end.
I will just add to that and make a plug for the book by saying that there is a whole chapter that addresses this question of corporate social responsibility and whether that can be seen as a form of global health policy and how we go from these very non-binding, wishy-washy corporate social responsibility doctrines toward more hard law treaties around corporate responsibility.
Isaac, and you'll need to speak loudly, I think, because the microphone's a bit away from you.
Okay, sure. Yeah, thank you for this wonderful discussion. I had lots of questions, but only one didn't get touched on, so I'll just skip to that one. So global health laws is an emerging field, and it's emerging in part from the practice of global health lawyers. And so I was wondering if the panelists could talk about their experience being at the cutting edge of both the science and the advocacy, and what it's like being straddling research and practice to creating this field.
Great question. Any, Uche, do you want to go
Let me
first?
jump on this. Part of the challenge for global health lawyers really is because you're operating in a discipline that in an area that is really by design interdisciplinary, and so sometimes it is really very difficult to cut across this idea that the policy dimension is equally as critical as the science of global health. And so there is really opportunity really to think about how law itself and the legal structure itself can be a determinant of health in the way we experience and encounter global health. And so it hasn't really been a very easy sort of relationship to manage, but yes, we continue to have these discourses, these conversations with others across the discipline to see how to sort of unify ideas around how to tackle and address global challenges.
I mean, it's a great question because I think in some sense, 5 or 6 years ago, I don't think I was too aware of even the term global health law. And then suddenly that was the field in which I worked. And so there's a way in which the people in the field have literally spoken the field into existence. I mean, I think that's what, not to make too fine a point of it, that's what academics do. But I think there's something really important in that, the field exists because it needs to exist. And the people who are engaged in the activity of global health are creating the scholarship, the institutions, like the consortium, the practices that really advance the area to some extent. And so there's something important, I think, in that, in terms of the role that we as participants in this area, the important role that we can have in really pushing forward the development of law, the development of practices, of institutions, of norms.
We do have a question from, if I can go, do you have an urgent? We have a question from online. Should I go to?
Yeah.
If you want to go to, and maybe you might be the perfect person to answer this, Ben.
Okay.
It's we were asked around what does the public health workforce need to know in order to uphold and live the principles of global health law. Of course, because when you think about it, most people who are in this area are working in different parts of public health and healthcare in different places, and not everyone, of course, who's contributing to and could benefit from global health law will be in global health law as a scholarly field like ours. So maybe Ben, if I can turn to you, what does the public health workforce need to know in order to uphold and contribute to and benefit from global health law?
So I think I'm in a good position to start to answer this question because I'm going to be using this book in a public health school and thinking about the public health workforce But I also think that it speaks to Isaac's question, which is a bit of an existential question, which is the science determines people's health. What is the role of policy? And in some ways, policy is a social construction. We made it up. And yet the social constructions that our policymakers develop determine whether people live or whether people die. And it's important for public health scholars and the public health workforce to understand the ways in which these policy structures influence their practice, determine what they do and what they don't do, determine the environments in which they operate, and determine at the end of the day whether people live or whether people die. At the end of the day, COVID-19 wasn't a scientific failure. If anything, it was a roaring scientific success. It was a policy failure. And so we need to recognize and make sure that our public health workforce recognizes that they are embedded within structures that are created by policies. And if the policies aren't reformed, no amount of science can make it. And I think that's why this book has such interdisciplinary potential, because there is this gap in the public health curriculum in understanding the global health institutions, with many public health students graduating without knowing what the World Health Organization is or does. It fills a niche in helping to understand the role of policy, both at the national level and at the global level. And it helps students to recognize that in a globalizing world, we can't think about public health at a local level without understanding the global context. So I think I'll end it there and turn it to you to think about what this means.
Well, we have only a few minutes, so maybe what I'll do is we've talked about some heavy stuff, and I think we've sort of admitted that we're always looking for trying to find the sliver of optimism in a pretty, I guess, challenging context and world. Wanted to end with maybe to each panelist, what most excites you about the field of global health law? I mean, we're all so privileged. We get to spend our days steeped in this, and we get to choose where we spend our time, right? How lucky are we? And we've chosen this for, I think, for lots of good and different reasons. Would love to get a sense from each of you, what excites you the most about the field of global health law?
Well, for me, I think that my excitement comes from the fact that even in the midst of crisis presents an opportunity for renewal. And so I see the field of global health as being, at this very critical phase in its development, where there's a lot of opportunity, for growth, for renewal, and it's really exciting to just be a part of that process of renewal. I think that this is a very important generational moment for the discipline. Happy to be part of it.
I completely agree. I think the generational point is really powerful. I mean, I think that the piece that really has been exciting for me, I feel like I've worked in a very small niche of international law for a long time, and I feel like the field of global health law has really broadened and connected scholars like me with scholars who work on the various areas of international that I didn't really relate to health, that I didn't necessarily have that much contact with before. The part that really, really excites me is to see how exciting and how excited and passionate about the field young researchers are, and how the field is growing. That part is really, really lovely.
So in many ways, the field is growing, and it was inspiring amidst the challenges of the pandemic that 40 leaders in the field of global health law who were busy responding to a pandemic threat also took time, stepped back and said, how can we prepare the next generation? How can we ensure that these same mistakes aren't made in the future? It's been really inspiring to teach with this book with my own students over the course of this semester, to sort of let them look at the page proofs, help to identify some of the flaws and how we can use it in the classroom. They've really been able across disciplines to engage with some of these materials in a way that I think speaks to the future of the field. I think we're seeing a number of rising new initiatives in the field that will carry it forward. We have a quarterly column now in the Journal of Law, Medicine, and Ethics on global health law. Elgar Publishing is launching a Journal of Global Health Law at the start of the new year. Oxford University Press, which developed this book, has been incredibly supportive in focusing at the intersection of international law and global health. This is our third volume that we've developed in the last 5 years. So I'm going to take a nap after this. So there will be no second volume anytime soon. But we've developed books on global health governance, on global health and human rights, and now on global health law. So I think this is an area where there's a generation that is clamoring for resources, but also a set of new actors who will take this field forward. And so that is what gives me a tremendous amount of hope, particularly in these moments when it feels like the policymakers have failed us, that the next generation will do better than we have done and will build a better world to face future challenges.
Building on that, Ben, I think there's few or any fields where it's just so ripe to have social impact, such immediate social impact, where it's on things that we all universally value, our health, right? So I love that. And the second thing I love, we get to work with people like you. So all of you and our colleagues around the world. So that's been a really wonderful part of the global health law field. So it's a good area if anyone's thinking of graduate school, wants to get into, this is an awesome field to be in. With that, we have to conclude. A big thank you to those who made this event possible, as well Lisa for physically hosting us here at the University of Toronto. And I think maybe I'll conclude, Ben, with a congratulations to you and Larry for the bringing together this book. And I guess thanks for inviting us to be part of the journey. And this has been a wonderful opportunity, I think, to celebrate the future of the field, what the field needs, and ideally inviting people into the field, because this is what's going to allow us to have big impacts around the world. So thanks so much, and I wish everyone a wonderful day. Thank you.